Hello and welcome to session 329 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll discuss the essay, mini review of If Anyone Builds It, but Everyone Dies by Will MacAskill. As in the previous sessions, we will focus on the object level critique, which Will divides into 4 parts. The first part of the essay concerns weaknesses in the analogy between evolution and gradient descent. The second part is about the role played by discontinuities in the book. The third is about whether all types of misalignment are truly catastrophic. And the fourth is one where Will MacAskill gives his highly critical appraisal of the proposal that is given in part 3 of the book. Here you see the evolution of taste buds, which are critical for the analogy in chapter 4, and Will identifies problems with this analogy. So the first disanalogy is to what extent evolution is aiming for the same target as alignment researchers. And this refers to the parable at the start of chapter 4, where it's claimed that evolution could not have aimed for genetic fitness even if it had tried. But as Will puts it, evolution isn't trying in any meaningful sense to produce fitness maximizers of distribution. I think this merits a longer answer in 2 parts. Because first, is it at all meaningful to talk about evolution trying to do something? Because evolution is an unconscious process. It isn't trying anything. It has no intentionality. That doesn't really make sense. But I think if you try to predict the resulting beings, then anthropomorphizing evolution as something that is trying to make organisms that are capable of doing things is in fact quite helpful. Okay, but is evolution maximizing fitness like in off-distribution environments? Well, again, in a literal sense, obviously not, because evolution operates on historic environments, like almost by definition. So we could anthropomorphize evolution and argue that, in a sense, it ought to try to prepare for the future. Because if evolution somehow planned probably, it would end up with more genetic fitness when future humans went off distribution. Kind of. Will argues that AI developers are doing the opposite of evolution because AI developers are trying to maximize alignment of distribution. Or at least that's what I get when I try to negate the first claim. There's many ways to negate a claim, and I think Will is a bit unclear about, like, this is my best interpretation of what he's saying. So, is it actually true? Well, if you ask most AI developers, what are you doing today? They will just say they have some other target than this for their maximization. And even if they did try to maximize alignment of distribution, well, then they aren't training on it because they can only train on proxies. And some of these proxies are even proxies for the things we want in themselves. So evolution doesn't strictly have a goal and uses proxies like organisms that obtain food and things like that. And AI developers have a goal, but this goal is in their head. And the point of the analogy is that the AI developers still have to use proxies. And that's the central part of the analogy. And that holds, even if at the very end it becomes slightly frayed. The next part of Will's critique is about how Eliezer fails to discuss disanalogies. So Will points out 4 important disanalogies between stochastic gradient descent and evolution, and these strongly point away from pessimism. I think, like, Will isn't entirely clear here, but I'm convinced that he is in fact saying that Eliezer did not include these 4 counter arguments in his book. But that is in fact not correct. Eliezer does in fact discuss these 4 analogies, 4 disanalogies, when he makes the analogy between evolution and AI training. So the first thing that Will would like Eliezer to discuss is that AI developers can choose to train away from instrumentality. And this is most of what is discussed in chapter 3, including on page 49. Will also thinks that Eliezer should consider that AI developers can use interpretability tools. Eliezer discusses this on page 54. Will thinks that an important difference is that stochastic gradient descent directly shapes the minds of the beings, which is a thing that Eliezer acknowledges on page 58. And Will's final disanalogy is that evolution can't test in advance, but AI developers can, and that is something that Eliezer also discussed on page 65. So I must admit that I think Will MacAskill might not have read this part very thoroughly. So for those of us who are adverse to reading the actual book, let's start by recapping briefly Eliezer's answers to these disanalogies. So the first is that Will suggests that we can choose to train minds that don't have instrumental desires, that don't want to get power, that don't want to multiply. This is a thing that is actually, it has a pretty deep answer, and Eliezer talks a lot about how these patterns are in fact deep and central to intelligence, and they cannot be trained away. And he also observes in a more obvious way that the AI developers want AIs that go hard. So we could choose not to build instrumental AI, but we are totally choosing to build instrumental AI, consequentialist maximizers, etc. Will acknowledges that interpretability is pretty limited at this moment, but it's there, right? It's better than nothing, and evolution does not have anything like interpretability. And in the book, Eliezer argues, yeah, but even if we had dramatically superior interpretability on evolution, we still wouldn't be able to predict ice cream. We are just really, really far from anything that could work. Another difference between evolution and stochastic gradient descent is how the updates affect the mind directly. But evolution works indirectly through genes and have like a much harder informational bottleneck through that. And that is true. And Eliezer explicitly acknowledges this and says that, yeah, if you were extremely optimistic, you would predict that this would give 0 complications, but actually in reality, it would give new complications. And finally, Will argues that one thing we can do is that we can test our AIs in many different kinds of scenarios and in adversarially selected environments. And Eliezer agrees with this in chapter 4, but he observes that there is one crucial kind of scenario where we cannot test them. And that's the scenario where we can't stop the AI from taking over. The second area where Will critiques if anyone builds it, everyone dies, is how it deals with discontinuities. So in part 2 of the book, Eliezer introduced a scenario where an AI called Sable takes over. So what's the takeoff speed of Sable in that scenario? Will hinges his analysis on one sentence by Eliezer. That is that Sable is a new sort of mind. And that's all that there is. And Will interprets this as Sable representing a sudden, sharp, large leap in intelligence. True, it might not be like the most extreme like discontinuity. He does acknowledge that, but he clearly sees this as a very dramatic discontinuity. But like if we take a literal reading, then it's totally possible that to have a qualitative change without any particular quantitative change in intelligence. You can't conclude from the fact that it's a new sort of mind that is dramatically smarter. But the key thing here is that Eliezer really doesn't describe the quantitative difference Like there's a thing where Galvani calls it amazing, which is really obviously Eliezer being sarcastic. We just don't know. It is an improvement of some kind, but we don't know. But there are 2 to 3 places where Eliezer compares the improvement that Sable represents with the improvement that reasoning models made when they first appeared. I think it's pretty reasonable that Will finds this discontinuity odd, since he notes Eliezer elsewhere argues that doom does not hinge on discontinuities in intelligence. And that's true. Like, there's a sense that Eliezer believes that we are doomed with or without discontinuities in intelligence. But Eliezer has, in fact, previously written very, very extensively about an intelligence explosion, right? So this book doesn't write about that almost entirely. So there's a sense that Will's critique here seems to be based on the other writings of Eliezer and not on the book at hand. And that's, of course, a substantial problem for a book review. And so I also want to answer, like, what is the actual discontinuity here for the record, right? Because the central discontinuity that Sable represents is not in intelligence, but on its ability to take over. Because it is logically required that for any binary ability, there will be one AI that is the first to have it. And here the AI is Sable, that is the first to have the ability to take over. Another critique is that Eliezer isn't being consistent with his definitions. And there is a sense that I agree with this, because I think the book would have been better if it was formally written and 4 times as long. So I guess perhaps I should blame Nate Suarez for that. Of course, that doesn't make sense, right? But Eliezer is, in fact, in the book, really, really consistently talking about a superintelligence, a mind that is much more capable than any human. But Will sees Eliezer as using the word superintelligence when he really means what Will calls strong superintelligence. And by strong superintelligence, Will does not mean anything like strong AI. Instead, he defines the word strong superintelligence as a being that is so intelligent that humans can't contribute strategically in any way. We are just totally redundant in any possible way. So, like, I'd like to know where Eliezer is inconsistent with this. There's a sense that in the beginning of part 2, humans can shut down Sable. At the end, humans are totally powerless. But Will does, in fact, explicitly specify that the problems with definition is in part 1. But where? There's a sense that the central claim in the book is that once an AI is super intelligent, it's smart enough to take over, and then everybody dies, right? So as far as I can tell, there's nothing in part 1 where that relates to a period where the AI can take over, but humans somehow live. So the problem isn't really with the definition, but as I see it, there's a Will is missing the part where there is a super intelligence, but everyone is hasn't been killed, right? That's where the core of the disagreement is, because that's the central claim. And on that part, Eliezer obviously failed to convince Will MacAskill, but convincing people is hard, right? So Eliezer is failing to convince, but he is in fact very clear in the book that the thing he's referring to is superintelligence, full stop. There's one more thing with definitions, because Will makes a further claim about AGI, which is a term that he uses 6 times in his essay, but he doesn't really define what does he mean with AGI. And in the book, Eliezer strongly cautions against using that particular term. So I'm going to restate Will's argument, but I'm going to replace the word AGI with superintelligence. I don't actually know if this is what Will means. So it is possible that the next slide is not faithful to his intent, but then he would need to define AGI. So here, Will presents his overall strategic picture of how do we align AGI, or what I'll here call superintelligence. So this is a process that has 5 steps. In the first, we have the current AI, and then we get superintelligence minus, which is something that is presumably 1 generation away from being able to take over. And then the next step is a regular superintelligence, more intelligent than any human. And after that, we get an even stronger superintelligence until we have such a strong superintelligence that humans can't contribute in the slightest. And on this model, Elias's claim is that we die precisely at the 3rd step, not at the 2nd, not at the 4th. And that's, of course, not a trivial statement, right? It's not true by definition, but that's the core claim. That's basically what the entire book is about. That is the claim the book argues for. But for Will, the central question is, can we, for each step in this chain, use the previous AI to control and align the next? So from the book, on these 4 arrows up here, Elias pretty clearly thinks that the answer to the first question is a clear yes. Aligning something that is less intelligent, or controlling something less intelligent than a superintelligence, is something we can do. And the answer to the second question is no, we cannot in fact control or align a superintelligence. And how about the next steps? I think Elias basically doesn't really consider the last 2, right? Why should he? Because we are probably dead by then. So there's a sense that Will is looking at a lot of additional things that seem to be not really relevant here. A substantial part of part 2 of the book describes the failure of superintelligence minus and the humans to together align a superintelligence, align and control a superintelligence. And obviously, I think there's a sense that this is what Will disagrees with, possibly pretty centrally. Like, how helpful would superintelligence minus be? Or how would the collaboration with humans go? So that isn't really obvious. So let's look at Will's model of how superintelligence minus would help. Now, Will doesn't engage at all with Elias's arguments in part 2, but he provides his own arguments. So let's look at those and look at his arguments about what we can expect to learn. Will argues that once we get closer to a superintelligence, we'll have much better insight in what it will look like. Well, obviously, we'll know how to build a superintelligence. In that sense, we'll know what it will look like. But the question is if we will know if it is safe. And personally, I think we might plausibly already be close to a superintelligence. So if we are already at that step, well, then Will's argument obviously falls apart. But if you ask me...
Why?
Why does it fall apart? The reason why it falls apart is that Will believes that we should continue to improve AI because we will learn more when we are one step from building a superintelligence. But if we are already one step from building a superintelligence, then we will not in fact learn anything more than we already have because we are already there, right? Make sense?
Yeah, and why is it not enough what we have now?
That may in fact be true. Like, it may be that we know enough right now, but Will is arguing that we will know more in the future, and that will be incorrect if we are already at the cusp of a superintelligence. Then we will not in fact learn more.
Yeah, but I think you are like very specifically like transforming what he's saying. He's saying that before we have superintelligence, we will know enough to build superintelligence. So this is still consistent with what he's saying. If you assume that the next step is superintelligence, that we are already at superintelligence minus, then as I understand Will's words, I would say that we already know enough. That's how I understand what Will is saying.
I think Will is saying that when we get closer, we will know more about what a superintelligence will look like, right? And if we imagine that we are like tomorrow, there will be a superintelligence, then it is in fact not true that we will know more later, because we are already at the cusp of a superintelligence right now. Make sense?
Yeah, but okay, never mind. Let's move on.
Cool. Okay, so I don't actually think that we will have a superintelligence tomorrow, right? But I expect that I will know more about how difficult is the alignment problem as we get closer to a superintelligence. So how do I expect to update on that? Well, I expect I'll be more certain about how difficult the alignment problem is, maybe a little, maybe a lot, but I don't actually expect to change my central estimate. Like, if I expected I would do that, then I would just change it already now. That's of course symmetrical in the sense that if you ask that to Will MacAskill, he would just counter that, yeah, he is optimistic and he also does not expect to systematically update either to be more optimistic or pessimistic, right? I don't know if he considers himself a Bayesian, but I think that is just straight up correct reasoning. So is there a stalemate here? It's not precisely balanced, because we will have less uncertainty if we continue, but there are also downsides to continuing. Because if it turns out that I'm right and Will is wrong, then waiting until we get closer to a superintelligence is in fact a very large strategic problem, because it's much, much harder to pause at the very last moment compared to pausing now. Will accuses Eliezer of claiming that we can't learn anything about alignment before the first critical try. Will doesn't provide a source. It isn't in the book. I think actually chapter 10 pretty strongly counters that claim. So it's kind of hard for me to directly answer Will's claim here. There's a sense that it's obviously wrong in a narrow sense, because we can learn something from failure. Like, imagine, for instance, we couldn't get rid of Sydney. Like, Sydney is like this Bing AI that was pretty spectacularly misaligned. And like, if all AIs were like that, then I think we would update on that, right? But the claim that is actually in the book is a lot more narrow. It's that current labs are not going to learn enough to not deploy a superintelligence. And the crucial problem, according to Eliezer, is we can't run experiments that are realistic enough to fool a situationally aware AI. Well, Will counters that we could perhaps learn something from studying more stupid AIs, because we would be able to fool these AIs into thinking that they may be able to take over. And yeah, presumably we could learn a little, but that would hardly amount to like much better insight by being better at studying like GPT-2. Sure, we could study GPT-2 better later, but that won't actually help us that much, and that isn't really a strong argument for rushing ahead. Now we get to a distinction of types of misalignment, and this was also a central part of Nina Panikseri's review of the book. Will introduces how his model cuts reality at a joint that you could call non-catastrophic misalignment and catastrophic misalignment. And non-catastrophic misalignment is that the AI tries to do something that the developer did not intend to try to do, but it doesn't try to take over. And I think it's important to distinguish this from a capability problem. So we need to also add some clause here that in order for something to be non-catastrophic misalignment, the AI needs to be explicitly aware of the developer intentions, because otherwise it's just straight up a capability problem. You could argue that it may also be worthwhile to distinguish even further on whether alignment was attempted or control was attempted. Because if the developer did not think about the possibility, then it's a different thing from if the AI is directly, actively subverting control or alignment efforts. So right now, we occasionally see non-catastrophic misalignment. We also see like things that would be catastrophic in the sense that the AI like tries to copy itself to the internet or something like that. That's a thing we have seen. But a lot of the time where we see misalignment, it seems to be non-catastrophic. So that seems to be something that gives us a sense of how aligned the AI is. But I think there's a sense that that's probably going to stop at roughly the current capability level, because very soon the AI is going to be aware that if it takes actions that the developers were trying to prevent it from and it can't take over, then it will just be stopped from that. So there's a sense that pretty soon we'll be completely in the dark on whether our alignment efforts work or not. Will proposes a risk-averse superintelligence as kind of a theoretical constructive counterexample to prove that non-catastrophic misalignment is possible. At least I think it's meant as a counterexample, because I don't think Eliezer claims, he certainly doesn't claim anything so absolute that a counterexample would disprove it. And in general, he claims that like alignment is possible. It's just not something we're going to get on the current trajectory. Okay, so Will asks us to consider a misaligned superintelligence that only cares about maximizing the number of paperclips and nothing else. Like, that's really classic, right? But it is risk averse. So if it has an option of certainty of n paperclips or 50% chance of twice the number of paperclips, then it will take the certain with a substantial preference. And it's not like it's a maximally risk-averse superintelligence, but it is more risk-averse than humans. At least that's what I assume, because if a maximally risk-averse AI would probably like never take any useful action, would always be happy with just one paperclip, right? And that's not what anyone's going to build. But this AI, Will claims, would not try to take over, because taking over is always more risky. But instead, the AI would cooperate with humans and like take a guaranteed salary. So my answer to this would start with like a proof that this risk-averse paperclip maximizer would in fact be catastrophically misaligned. It is not a non-catastrophically misaligned AI. So the classic way, there are two classic ways to model risk aversity. The first is to have a utility function u of x, which is x to some parameter a that is between 0 and 1. So if like a half, then it's the square root of the number of paperclips. And if the utility function grows with the square root instead of growing linear, then it's risk averse. But unfortunately, the problem here is also that like for any level of risk aversity, we can pretty easily calculate, yeah, but what if we offer the AI just enough more paperclips to be worth the risk, right? And of course, if like turning the entire universe into paperclips, that's a lot of paperclips, right? So for all reasonable A's, there is the expected number of paperclips by taking over the universe just straight up dominates. And so the AI will try to take over quod erat demonstratum. There are other ways this could fail, like if the AI suspects that dealing with human, that may not be without risk in itself. So, and that's often a reasonable assumption. So there's a sense here that I'm pretty confused, because claiming that this risk-averse paperclip maximizer is non-catastrophically misaligned seems really like a trivial mistake. And Will MacAskill is pretty smart. I'm confused about why he would make this example. It's possible that I understood what he, like maybe I misunderstood what he wrote or what he's trying to do, or maybe my proof is wrong. I'm really confused here. And my confusion grows as we continue. Go.
Maybe. I think most people don't really buy too much into those simple models, like, say, for example, this risk-averse model that you just said. I think this may be one of the biggest core disagreements with Yudkowsky, because Yudkowsky seems to derive most of his arguments from the simple models.
I think the core question is, when Will introduces the risk-averse paperclip maximizer, does Will believe in this? And that's actually something that I struggle quite a bit with, because it is a really bad example, and it's not really a counterexample in a meaningful way. So I was pretty confused about why introduce this. Well, the problem, as I see it, is that Will continues with this risk-averse paperclip maximizer, because it's not really just introduced as an example that non-catastrophic misalignment is possible. It goes to whether it is likely at all. So Will continues that there's a sense that we can in fact have existential safety through risk-averse superintelligence, or at least it isn't unlikely that they are risk-averse. I'm confused here, and I think there's a chance that Will MacAskill is just straight up trolling here and presenting arguments that he doesn't actually believe in, because as far as I can see, the argument for safety through misaligned superintelligence is just an extremely weak case for optimism. But Will suggests that risk-averse superintelligences are in fact much more likely, and he uses a counting argument for this. Argues like how many utility functions are linear in the amount of resources compared to how many are risk-averse. Well, for the risk-averse, there's an additional free parameter A, so there's a sense that there will be more risk-averse utility functions. So if there are more risk-averse utility function, then if we get a superintelligence with a random utility function, it's more likely we'll have a risk-averse superintelligence. So probably we will get a risk-averse superintelligence just by default. But of course, this isn't how counting arguments work. As you make more complex assumptions, then the likelihood that you will hit on something like that is smaller, not larger. And Will adds a remark in parentheses. Oh yeah, by the way, this argument symmetrically argues for risk-seeking AIs. They would also be more likely. So there's a sense that Will introduces a fatal counter-argument to his own argument, but he doesn't really engage with this. He's not really bothered by this. I think he seems deeply unserious, and I think there's a chance that I'm just straight up trolled here, and this argument isn't meant to be taken seriously at all. But I am confused here. Finally, Will critiques the proposal in the last chapters of if anyone builds it, everyone dies. And so the central ask in the book is, of course, ceasing the development of superintelligence. And Will's first objection is this proposal is extremely unlikely to happen. And yeah, I agree it's very unlikely, but you have to measure it against specific alternatives. And if there are other options that are more likely but less impactful, they may still be a bad choice compared to just pausing. Another problem Will raises is that if you implement a pause for conscientious actors, well, that could backfire if you, that would obviously backfire, so then you don't do that, right? There's a sense that every policy proposal can be misimplemented, and if you misimplement it in the totally obvious way, it may be worse. I think this is a generalized critique that counters basically every policy proposal ever. Now, Rob Bensinger, he also read this review, and he had a comment on this part, saying that Will says that he's against the proposals in the book, and that means that he's basically against all regulation, even on monitoring the amount of compute. And Will MacAskill clarifies in a reply to that actually he is pro-regulation, and he is in fact in particular pro-regulation about the monitoring of compute. And I think Will just wrote that he's against the proposal in the book, so I think Rob's reading was quite reasonable here. Will also have some specific counter-proposals, including allowing close substitutions for agentic superintelligence. I think that seems like a pretty doomed proposal. Like if you build something like a tool superintelligence, then the general nature of that research will surely lead to a superintelligence shortly after. Like if you have a tool AI, you can give it a command prompt or something like that, and then you have an agentic superintelligence. In a less wrong comment, Will gave a concrete example of how Eliezer's work and arguing for a pause distracts from Will's personal efforts for AI safety. Because Will recounts a discussion with a potential funder who was very worried about AI takeover. And this was a philanthropist, and he was wealthy enough to double the total funding for AI safety. Like serious money, I would expect that's probably a billionaire or something like that. The problem is that this person did not choose to fund AI safety. Because he was annoyed that the people in AI safety talk about stopping development, and he thinks we should not talk about that. I think Will MacAskill should consider whether this actually represents someone who has set an explicit trap for him, because like there's a limited set of billionaires that are matching this description, and a number of these have very obvious motives to not be stopped because they expect that they will be able to have some disproportional influence on the light cone in the future. And the bait of this trap also sounds too good to be true, right? Like moving incredible amounts of funding away from mega yachts or whatever these billionaires otherwise spend it on, and move that towards AI safety. That's like extremely impactful, right? So it's such a it sounds too good to be true. And the only thing we have to do for that is just the small price of just being a bit more circumspect, just polite, realistic, strategic. And the answer for me clearly is no. The strategic landscape around AI safety is so confusing that frank talk is essential to make any progress. I think we need to do the right thing, and we should not take the bait and not fall into the trap of not saying what we actually think. So Eliezer and the rest of us should continue to call him as we see him. That concludes my presentation of mini review of If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies by Will MacAskill. Ceterum censeo, machinam sapientam esse delendam.